We're going to be discussing Jewish food today, and I will begin by saying there is no such thing as Jewish food. If I had a bagel for every time I heard that statement, I could cater a 50-person bris and still have you all over for breakfast on Yom Kippur. Okay? But the statement always bemused me because nobody says that about other cuisines. Nobody says that there's no such thing as Japanese food or German food or American food. And if you'll say, okay, well, those are countries, of course they have foods. They don't deny the existence of other cultures' foods either. Nobody denies the fact that there is soul food. Nobody says that Arab food isn't a thing. It seems that only Jewish food gets singled out to deny the existence of it. And I always wondered why that was, and the question became stronger as I started to research our food. So, if you travel around the world, you will encounter numerous foods that in the languages of the people that live there are specifically, explicitly identified as Jewish. Some of you may be familiar with one of the most famous. You can go to Rome and you can eat carciofi alla Giudia, Jewish-style artichokes, or fried artichokes. Okay, delicious. Okay, all over Italy you have many foods that are identified either as alla Giudia, alla Ebraica, Hebrew style, alla Mosaica from Moses. Okay? These are saying in Italian, this is a Jewish food. You can go to Holland and you can have something that is widely eaten, that is known as Jodes butter cake. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. I asked my Dutch friend, I tried to get it right, but I probably messed it up. But the butter cookie is like kind of like a cross between a butter cake and a butter cookie, but Jodse, or Jodes, means Jewish. Okay? And if you go back to medieval times, to medieval Spain, you can find an Arabic language cookbook that has 6 different dishes, all of which are explicitly referred to as Jewish recipes. And in medieval times, there was an Arabic saying, sleep in a Christian bed, enjoy Jewish food. I don't know what supposedly is so good about a Christian bed, but I know that you can't enjoy Jewish food if it doesn't exist. So why is it that we have this? And in fact, by the way, you don't have to travel around the world or through history to find these foods. You can go to the corner grocery here in America, and you can get 2 foods that are identified in America as Jewish. One of them is Jewish rye bread. That is its name. It's called Jewish rye bread, not the brand. Okay? And kosher dill pickles. Okay? When they say kosher dill pickles, it's not like kosher salt. Kosher salt is called that due to the process. It is used to make it kosher. But there's nothing more kosher about these dill pickles than any other pickles. Okay? They didn't have a circumcision test. Okay? Basically, it's another way of saying these are Jewish pickles. Okay? So if people from all over the world, throughout hundreds of years, have identified foods as Jewish, why would anyone deny the existence of these foods? And frankly, I believe that at least in part, it stems from anti-Semitism. Okay? I'm not somebody who finds anti-Semitism at every turn and is always calling out about it, but in this case, I think that the idea of saying there's no such thing as Jewish food is a way of minimizing the status of the Jewish people. They say only a real people can have a cuisine. Since you don't have a cuisine, you must not be a real people. And if you think about it, obviously we are unique, okay? With our hybrid identity as a people / nation / religion / ethnicity / whatever, we're not like other peoples. And different is often picked on, okay? But I believe that there's at least a little bit of truth in it, and the proof is in the follow-up that you usually do. When people say, oh, there's no such thing as Jewish food, what they usually follow it up with is, they just eat whatever everybody else eats. Okay? And what that implies is that there's a demand placed on Jewish food that is not placed on any other cuisine, namely indigeneity, and by extension, uniqueness. Why would we think that a food needs to be uniquely eaten by Jews, and only eaten by Jews, and invented by Jews, in order to say it's a Jewish food? We don't say it about any other cuisine. Ask anybody to name an Italian food. One of the top 5 is definitely going to be pasta. Does anybody care that pasta was eaten in the Far East for well over 1,000 years before it got to Italy? Or that it was most likely the Arabs, when they conquered Sicily, who taught the Italians how to make pasta? No, because it is an Italian food. And so there's no reason not to call it that. Okay? Nobody cares that quiche has precursors in England and Germany and even ancient Rome. Or that ratatouille is extremely similar to dishes in Spain and Italy and in India even. They are French foods, indubitably. So why is it only Jewish food that people require indigeneity and uniqueness? And let it be said that there are foods that are uniquely and indigenously Jewish. Okay, so certainly those have to be Jewish foods. For example, matzah. Nobody else eats it because why the hell would they? It tastes bad, okay? But that is a food that is unique to us, grows directly out of our national mythology, and is directly commanded to us in the Torah to eat. You can't get much more Jewish than that. And if matzah is a Jewish food, so are all of the extensions from it. Matzah balls, matzah bride. Many of you may know mina de matzah, which is a delicious Sephardic matzah lasagna, kind of matzah and meat lasagna. It's delicious. Okay? Those have to be Jewish foods too. Okay? I would argue that the subject of the book I'm writing, the Shabbat stew, is also a particularly Jewish food. What I'm referring to are multi-ingredient stews, typically with a grain and a meat at their core, that are cooked on Friday, left to heat overnight on a slow flame, on a low flame, and eaten on Shabbat day for lunch. There are many multi-ingredient stews around the world, but very few of them cook through the whole night because there's not really a reason to. We have the reason because it's basically a loophole so that we can eat hot food on Saturday, on Sabbath, without actively cooking. Okay? And yes, there are maybe a few other ones that cook through the night, but most of them, plausibly, can be traced back to Jewish precursors, descendants of the Shabbat stew. And so I would say that that is also a uniquely Jewish food and an indigenous Jewish food. And where I come from, Israel, where 70% of the population is Jewish, obviously there's a lot of uniquely and indigenously Jewish foods there. So for example, in Jerusalem, I can go to a place that sells a dish called shamburak. Not sambusak, for those of you who may know that. Shamburak was invented in Jerusalem by a member of the local Syrian Kurdish Jewish community as a way of repurposing Shabbat leftovers. What it is basically is it encases a mix of mashed potatoes and deliciously cooked meat in a boat-shaped bread. Think of it as like a better version of a meat calzone. Okay? It's really good. But that point also raises an interesting point, which is, if it is so similar to a calzone, can I still call it an original dish? And I think this highlights a question that needs to be answered on a more broad level. If you look at the history of the development of food in the world, every food is essentially based on something previously. Nobody invents a dish ex nihilo. It's always based on something from before. So at what point in the continuum of food history does a dish cease to be a version of that and become something new? Let's say that the first dish that was ever cooked was some kind of barley gruel. If somebody was cooking that and then he decides to throw in, or she decides probably back then, right, throw in some chickpeas, does that make it a new dish, or is it still a version of the original dish? And maybe when it's just a few chickpeas, it's not. When they start to add in more and more ingredients, at a certain point, it's going to become something new. Maybe swapping out lamb for salmon in a dish might make it a new dish, but if you replace ginger with cinnamon, maybe it's not a new dish. Okay? And so there isn't an answer to these questions, but I think it is valuable to, and it will also relate to what we're going to be doing tonight, I think it's valuable to discuss some of the different things that might make a dish a new dish and might just make it a version of them. So first we can look at the ingredients. And the ingredients of any dish break down really into multiple categories. You have the core main ingredients, you have secondary or supporting ingredients, And then you have things like flavorings, like spices and herbs and things of that nature. Okay? So maybe changing a main ingredient might make it a new dish, whereas changing the spicing might not. Also, preliminary preparation of the ingredients. If I take the same cut of meat, and in one dish I use it raw, and in another one I'm using a smoked or pickled version of that, they're going to taste totally different. Okay? We have cooking methods. Nowadays, foods might be broiled, braised, fried, stewed, boiled, dry smoked, all of these things, okay? And each of them, the same ingredients that are roasted are not going to taste the same if you boil them, okay? So these are different. We can also think about how and when the dish is eaten, okay? Is it a main dish? Is it a side dish? Is it a dessert? Is it a snack between meals? Is it only eaten at specific meals, or is it eaten at any meal of the day? Is it a celebratory food for one people and a everyday food for another people? All of these things might affect that. And also, less so, but also significant, is the name. If you have two different dishes that have totally different names, but other than that they're identical, and you can plausibly show the connection between them, then they're probably the same dish. But maybe if you have a few different things that are different, that change in name is the one thing that pushes it over the top. You say, you know what? This probably is a different dish. So changing the ingredients is something significant, and I think it shows that indigeneity or uniqueness is not a question, it's a non-starter question. But that changing of the ingredients also highlights a second category. There are numerous foods around the world that are similar between a Jewish version and a non-Jewish version, but the Jewish version, we change certain ingredients typically due to kashrut kosher laws. For example, maybe eliminating pork or shellfish or avoiding milk and meat. For example, Italian Jews famously will replace pork products with goose. So they make like a goose prosciutto. Okay? You can go to Alsace. One of the great dishes of Alsace is choucroute garnie. Choucroute garnie is basically fresh sauerkraut mixed with all kinds of charcuterie, different kinds of preserved meats. The main one is using lots of pork products, okay, smoked pork and pork sausages and all that. But there is a version known as choucroute garnie à la juive, the Jewish choucroute garnie, that's only using beef or goose or things like that, and only kosher meats. Okay. In India, many of the Indian Jewish communities will use curries that in their curries that will replace, it's a meat curry that will replace milk product with coconut milk. Okay? And in medieval Spain, agristada was a very common thickener for meat stews. Agristada is what most of you who know Greek food will know as abolemono. It's a lemon egg sauce, but it's a thickener. It's a way of thickening a meat stew without using a dairy product. These are all changes that Jews made for kosher. So these are different versions. There's no way you're going to confuse goose prosciutto for ham prosciutto, for pork prosciutto. Okay, so these are a second category. But I would still say that there are numerous foods that are Jewish foods that are neither unique to us, indigenous to us, or changed, that are actually the same version. If you go to anybody and you say, tell me a Jewish food, as long as they're not our haters who are going to deny this Jewish food, they're going to have a lot of answers for you, like maybe chicken soup or brisket. Okay? In other parts of the world, it might be fried fish or sweet and sour cabbage or specific types of bread. These are foods that the people, the populace, recognizes as Jewish for various reasons. That's how those two American foods got the name Jewish rye and kosher dills. Neither of these were unique to the Jewish people in Eastern Europe. Everybody there ate those, ate that kind of pickle, ate that kind of rye bread. But it was in America that the Jews here were the ones who most recognizably ate it, and more importantly, who were selling it to everybody else. And so in the American mind, they became associated with us. And this happens all over the world. A lot of those foods that are called Jewish style are only called that because they were associated with us. And many of them we eat in exactly the same form as other people eat. And I'm thinking here specifically of stuff from my country. I'm talking about falafel and hummus and things of that nature. Okay? People will argue about the origins and the ownership of these things, and they'll say like, you can't claim it, you're stealing, and it's appropriation, etc. The fact is, let's start with falafel. Okay? Falafel is a food that is completely modern, invented in the late 1880s. And it was 100% invented by Arabs, by the way. Okay? But that means that they were eating it for about 20 years, 25 years before the Jews were. And not only that, but it changed. Okay? So we start with an Egyptian dish. Okay? The Lebanese Arabs change it from fava beans into chickpeas. And the Jews in Tel Aviv take it, shrink it down to little balls, and shove it into a pita with salad and tahini. Okay? It's a regional food. Who owns it? Everybody? Nobody? Both? I don't know, but it's shared by everybody. Hummus is something that's been eaten throughout the Middle East by Jews, by Muslims, by Christians for hundreds and hundreds of years. It doesn't belong to anybody, and we need to look a little bit deeper into this idea of ownership also. If you go out and you buy a fancy sports car, right, you could say that you own a Corvette. It's yours. You bought it, you own it. Does that mean that nobody else owns a Corvette? Of course not. So why can't we think about food in the same way? Maybe falafel belongs to Israeli Jews and to Palestinian Arabs and to Egyptians and Lebanese and Iraqis and everybody. I think we need to change our idea of what this means. And let's also talk about that salad that got shoved into the pita as well. 50% of that salad is tomatoes. Tomatoes did not exist anywhere in the Middle East until the 19th century. It's not an ancient food. And since they were introduced, everybody eats this salad. So I want to get past that idea and understand that ownership of food isn't really a thing. Food can be political. I'm not denying that there are political elements of food, but more often than not, those politics do not grow out of the food, they are glommed onto it on top. So to summarize, we can look at foods from around the world, Jewish foods. There are Jewish foods that are Jewish foods because they are uniquely ours. They are Jewish foods because we altered them and turned them into a different version. And there are a lot of foods that are just identified with us. But when we think about it, from bagels to falafel, from sweet and sour cabbage to sour borscht, all of these foods around the world, we realize there is no such thing as a Jewish food, except when there is. So thank you guys very much. Shelley.
So, a couple of questions, just a comment. I was in Naples a while back, and I remember I had a tour guide, and he said that he said pizza,
No, this is a side note. Okay.
But it just seems like filtered fish, right?
Yep.
And a bagel.
Yep.
Is filtered fish not Jews? What are Jewish people the first ones to start making?
So again, this is one of those continuum things. So earlier than Jewish style gefilte fish in Germany, for those who don't know, by the way, I don't mean if you don't know what gefilte fish is, I'm sure most of you do, but the word gefilte means stuffed. Okay? Filled. Gefilte means filled, right? Originally, gefilte fish, you would take a whole fish, slit the skin, take out the skeleton and the fish meat, remove the meat from the fish, chop it up, mix it with flour and onions and some of that, and shove it back into the skin. You were literally refilling the fish. Okay? It was a way, because once you remove the organs and the skeleton, you have more space left inside, so you're basically taking a certain amount of fish and you're making it last for more people and fill more food, fill more mouths by shoving all that stuff inside, right? So Germans did this, non-Jewish Germans were filling their fish this way before the gefilte fish was invented, but they were using expensive ingredients like fancy spices and stuff like that. So the version that's using real cheap filler is a Jewish version, but we weren't the first to say, oh, let's take it out of the fish and stuff it back in with other stuff mixed in. So again, is it a new dish or is it the same dish, a different version of it? That's kind of the question.
Adapted.
we took something that was being done and we adapted it and altered certain ingredients for our needs and our purposes. So maybe it is a Jewish food, maybe it's not. It's up to everybody to decide that. That's a perfect example of is it or isn't it.
The bagel.
So the bagel the best book that I've seen on the bagel, if anybody has a chance to read, it's a very readable but really well-researched book, is called The Bagel by a woman named Maria Balitska. Have you read it? You're nodding? Okay.
I saw it.
It's actually a really good book. It's a quick read and really well-researched. According to her, both the bagel and its closest relative, which is a Polish bread, no, not the biala, that's very different, but a Polish bread called oberzanek, they both descend from the German pretzel, which is also a wheaten bread that is boiled and then baked. But then from Germany, as people moved into Poland, there's slightly different versions of the Polish one and the Jewish one, but according to what she's uncovered, the bagel is a Jewish bread. In fact, in a Polish dictionary from the beginning of the 20th century, they define bagel as Jewish obarzanek. But what's really interesting is that now that bagels have become so popular, I was looking on YouTube and I find some Polish woman who's showing a video about how to make obarzanek, and it says that it's Polish bagels. So it went the other way, but it's very interesting. Yeah. I know we have more food to eat. I'm happy to take questions now, but also we can do it informally, and we're going to have more debates, more food, and I'm also happy to stick around. I'll just say, by the way, I have a website and a newsletter. I have business cards that people want. I'm happy to give you. You can sign up for a newsletter there and be in touch that way. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Hope it sparked a lot of thought. And the main thing I like to spark is that food isn't just about nourishing us and tasting good. Food is meaningful and has a lot to say, and I hope that we'll all think a lot more about our own food.